The sun will be darkened, the moon will give no light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Whoa, that really does sound like the end of the world, doesn't it? When it seems our world is ending, we have two choices. We can either do what everyone else is doing and give in to the fear and the worry and look out for ourselves and hoard the toilet paper, or we can choose to trust that no matter what is happening, God is in control and his people have a role to play in it. Take a trip back a few years with me, because I think the events of 2020 and 2021 changed us in ways that we couldn't even imagine. In March of 2020, the COVID lockdowns began. In May, the George Floyd event happens, and there's protests everywhere. For us here in Salem, in September of 2020, the Santiam fires came and affected so many lives. And then in November of 2020, we had that debated election. And then on January 6th of 2021, we had the Capitol riot, something I thought I'd never see. And then for us again in Salem in February of 2021, we had this huge ice storm that seemed like a huge natural disaster. And I know for many that 1 year span just brings back memories of such personal and painful loss. And for all of us, as we think back, I think we think back on the division, the anger, the frustration, the hurt, and especially the fear. Because unprecedented times breeds unprecedented fear. And I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm waiting for the next unprecedented thing to happen. Like there's rumors of other pandemics, and we've got this election going on and political upheaval and everybody angry at each other. And there's even politicians talking about World War III. And no matter what happens, it's pretty much guaranteed that something unprecedented is going to happen. And we have a choice. We can either live in fear of the unknown future, or we can be ready for it. And I'm not talking about prepping. So the next time we have unprecedented times, instead of giving into fear and anger and chaos, we can choose to be voices of calm and peace and reason and love. And Jesus actually told us how. And if we had paid attention to his teachings back in 2020 and 2021, I think our responses as a community and as individuals would have been very different. But now we can pay attention, and we can be ready and have direction and guidance and comfort when the next unprecedented thing happens. Because Jesus offers confidence in the face of overwhelming fear. So let's look at the story of Jesus and see how this actually works. So after challenging the temple leaders and condemning what the temple system had become, Jesus is now leaving Jerusalem for the last time. But his disciples are mostly like, backwoods teenagers, are still grappling with this big trip to the big city. As Jesus was leaving the temple that day, one of his disciples said, "Teacher, look at these magnificent buildings. Look at the impressive stones in the walls." Jesus replied, "Yes, look at these great buildings, but they'll be completely demolished. Not one stone will be left on top of another." And as we've said before, the temple was the pride of every Jew. It was an architectural wonder of the ancient world. It was initially designed by King David and built by his son Solomon, and by Jesus' time it had been destroyed and rebuilt and then magnificently expanded. The temple was the focal point of the Jewish world. It was central to their worship and their national identity. It'd be like for us how we feel about like the Capitol, the flag, and the church all in one. And the boys are impressed. But Jesus, not so much. He says it might look impressive, but it's going to be completely and utterly destroyed. Which for these young teenage Jewish boys is shocking. It's scary. It would mean the end of the world as they know it. It would end the sacrificial system. And without the temple, how would people experience God and live out his laws? And in their minds, if the temple is destroyed, then it would signify the end of the world. So, after making camp for the night, 4 disciples come up to Jesus and ask him, when is this going to happen? And how are we going to know when it's about to happen? And Jesus' answer actually provides guidance for all of us when it feels like our world is ending. Now, to be honest, the passage we're going to look at is very debated and can be difficult to understand and definitely teach. There's so many different ideas of what this truly means and the details and all of that. And I don't have time to go through all of that. Some people in this passage say Jesus is only talking about the end of time when he comes back and the world's remade. Some say he's only talking about the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70 and the destruction of the temple by the Romans. Some say he's talking about both at the same time, like when you take 2 panes of glass and kind of look at them through each other, right? Some say it's both, but what he's saying is divided up differently, and then they divide that up differently. Now, the section we're going to talk about today, I think, from my studies, seems to be about the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And even though there are often immediate and long range aspects to biblical prophecy, the immediate future and the disciples' actual question about when's the temple going to be destroyed, that would have been most relevant to them at the time. Now, either way, whichever of these things is correct, the main point is the same. No matter what is happening, God is in control and his people have a role. And so in his answer, Jesus basically says what you do in these times is way more important than when these things happen. Jesus replied, "Don't let anyone mislead you, for many will come in my name, claiming, 'I am the Messiah.' They will deceive many. You will hear of wars and threats of wars, but don't panic. Yes, these things must take place, but the end won't follow immediately. Nation will go to war against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in many parts of the world, as well as famines. But this is only the first of the birth pains, with more to come." And Jesus knows his boys are worried and scared about the fall of the temple. And so he says, don't be deceived, and during this time, don't panic. And before the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, there were many people claiming to be the Messiah, come to rescue them from Rome. They convinced people to follow them. And all of these false messiahs were eventually defeated and killed, and they actually got their followers killed too. And Jesus warns the disciples, don't trust everyone who claims to be coming from me or even claims to be me. Stick to what you know about me. My kingdom won't come through conquest and violence and rebellion and force. So think clearly and evaluate what these imposters are actually saying. And when major events happen and natural disasters happen, don't panic. These aren't the signs of the end of the world. These aren't the signs that the end is coming. This is actually just the way of the world. This is how things have happened for all of history. Don't freak out with every event thinking it's the end. Be calm and let the story unfold. When the world is falling apart, Jesus followers are called to think clearly and stay calm. Now, when we're going through unprecedented times, it's one thing to kind of watch it happen out there and hear stories about it, but it's another thing when it actually starts affecting us personally. So, what do we do when we're actually swept up in that story? And Jesus answers that too. He tells his disciples that when the time approaches, they will be persecuted, they will be arrested, they'll be abused, and they'll be put on trial in front of kings and governors. He says, but even then, at that time, it's not time to freak out, it's not time to fight, and it's not time to flee. It's time to play your role. But this will be your opportunity to tell them about me. For the good news must first be preached to all nations. But when you are arrested and stand trial, don't worry in advance about what to say. Just say what God tells you at the time, for it is not you who will be speaking, but the Holy Spirit. And Jesus tells them, when things start getting bad, instead of trying to save yourself or fighting for your way, you will have the opportunity to tell people about me. See, think about it. If people will no longer be able to discover God and experience him through the temple, then there must be something else that will take its place. So the disciples must spread the good news of Jesus, that we can have direct access to God through Jesus. We don't need a temple. We can experience his kingdom in our lives every day, now and forever. And Jesus says that message needs to go out before the temple is destroyed. And as we see in Acts chapter 8, that's exactly what happened. The early church was persecuted, and they spread out all over the known world, spreading the good news of Jesus before the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. And this whole idea must have been so overwhelming for these teenage peasants to think that they would be standing in front of governors and kings. But Jesus promises them they don't have to worry because the Holy Spirit will speak through them and he will use them to expand his kingdom to everyone, everywhere. I mean, this is the kingdom focus that we talked about last time. Unprecedented times create unprecedented opportunities for good. Opportunities to offer the love and the peace and the good news of Jesus to a world that desperately needs it. And think back with me to those events, those challenging months of 2020 and 2021. Remember the fear, the uncertainty, the divisions. Now imagine if instead of being driven by fear, we as individual Jesus followers and a community had embraced the love and peace and direction Jesus offers. Like, how different might our responses have been then? Now, Jesus still hasn't really answered the disciples' question of when this is going to happen, how do we know it's going to happen? And so he kind of answers in reverse. He tells them what to look for before the fall of the temple happens. The day is coming when you will see the sacrilegious object that causes desecration standing where he should not be. Reader, pay attention. Then those in Judea must flee to the hills. Now, some people believe Jesus is talking about some distant future where there's some rebuilt temple and the Antichrist goes into that new temple and defiles it in some way. But what seems most likely to me is Jesus is using an event from 169 BC to warn the disciples about their own future. A leader, part of Alexander the Great's former empire, Antiochus IV, he actually conquered Jerusalem, set up idols in the temple, and even sacrificed pigs on the altar to honor Zeus, which is referred to in the book of Daniel as the abomination of desolation. So what Jesus is most likely saying is, when you see something like that happen again in this temple, and you'll know when you see it, then it is time to get out of Jerusalem and run. And historically, we don't know what that specific abomination was in 70 AD. Like, we don't have detailed records from a conquered and slaughtered group of people. But Jesus tells his disciples, when you see this thing, which you will know what it is, you will recognize it, get out. Because what is following is going to be some of the worst suffering imaginable. And we know from historical records that the siege of Jerusalem was just unimaginably horrible. The Romans besieged Jerusalem. There's infighting among the Jewish leaders. They even murder each other in order to get control, in order to defeat Rome. There's stories of people murdering each other and cannibalism because they're starving so badly. And then the Romans actually do break through into Jerusalem, and they burn the city to the ground. They plunder the temple and completely destroy it, and they slaughter or enslave most of the people. And then the Romans actually take the plundered gold from the temple back to Rome, and that's what they use to help fund the building of the Colosseum. And Jesus tells them, even then, even after all that, people are still going to try to deceive you and try to tell you that they are now the Messiah who will restore everything. Jesus says, don't believe them. Because, why? The Messiah has already come. And all of this stuff that happens will actually prove that I have already come. And he says, here's what is actually happening when all of this goes down. And for us, this is the key. This is how we can face unprecedented times with unprecedented confidence. Watch out. I have warned you about this ahead of time. At that time, after the anguish of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will give no light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Whoa. The sun darkening, the moon not shining, stars falling from the sky, like that really does sound like the end of the world, doesn't it? Well, it is the end of the world as they know it. See, this language it seems strange to us. It seems like, yes, the complete universe is falling apart. But in the Jewish scriptures, this language was used to describe the fall of kingdoms and empires, to describe a complete change of the world order. See, the lights are going out in the current centers of power, and something new is coming to replace it. So what is coming? A new era, a new world, a new kingdom, and a new king. Then everyone will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds with great power and glory. And he will send out his angels to gather his chosen ones from all over the world, from the farthest ends of the earth and heaven. And if you've been following along, we know the Son of Man is Jesus' favorite phrase for himself. And he's actually describing what the prophet Daniel foretold. As my vision continued that night, I saw someone like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient One and was led into his presence. He was given authority, honor, and sovereignty over all the nations of the world, so that people of every race and nation and language would obey him. His rule is eternal. It will never end. His kingdom will never be destroyed. So the Son of Man will come and take his throne and create a new people for himself, a new nation. And the temple will no longer be the focus of the people of God. The Son of Man will be their identity, because the temple isn't needed anymore. People don't need to reach out to God because God has already come to them as the man, Jesus, who has all the glory and all the power. And Jesus says, I will be enthroned. I will be vindicated, because all this will show that I am who I said I am, and I can do what I said I can do. So when the world seems to be ending and everything seems to be falling apart, we can stay calm and play our role, because we know we belong to the true King of the universe who will rule for eternity. When the world is shaken to its core, the King is still on his throne. Okay, but the disciples asked, when will this actually happen? And Jesus is about to get to the answer. Now learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things taking place, you can know that his return is very near, right at the door. Now, unfortunately, from my research, this translation's a little weak here, because it says his return is near, where in the Greek, the meaning could either be he is near or it is near. And in the context and the way things are worded, what makes most sense is it, the time, the fall of the temple. Look out, because it is near. That seems to be a better choice. And so the disciples still are asking, okay, when will it happen? When will the temple fall? And Jesus finally gets to the answer. I tell you the truth, this generation will not pass from the scene before all these things take place. Heaven and earth will disappear, but my words will never disappear. So Jesus very clearly says, everything I've just said will happen in your lifetime. And it did. in 70 AD. And Jesus assures them, what I am saying is even more sure than heaven and earth. I promise you all of this will happen, so trust it. So if all of this has already happened, like, what does it actually mean for us now? What do we do with this? Well, here's what we do. When it seems our world is ending, we have two choices. We can either do what everyone else is doing and give in to the fear and the worry and look out for ourselves and hoard the toilet paper or find someone to blame or someone to fight. Or we can choose to trust that no matter what is happening, God is in control and his people have a role to play in it. We can experience peace and confidence in the face of any unprecedented event, and we can be a beacon and a pillar of calm and peace and confidence. And instead of trying to figure out how to get out of it, we can find our role in it. We can show those around us that there is a king who is greater than anything that can happen to us. So how? What do we do while we wait for the world to fall apart again? We can practice now before the unprecedented becomes precedent. Now, I have a confession to make. This is one of my biggest regrets of that unprecedented year we talked about. I feel like as a pastor, a leader of a church, I didn't prepare people to be able to get past the fear and the anger and to think clearly and to see their role for doing good in times like that. When our world fell apart, we as individuals and as a church community hadn't developed the instinct to calmly trust our King and look for our role for good. But we can learn from our mistakes. And we can practice with small things now before big things come. So here's one simple tool to prepare us for whatever's on its way. Meditate on these 3 words. Jesus is King. Write it down somewhere you see it. Write it on your hand somewhere. Even get a tattoo of it. Jesus is King. And then as things are happening around you and you remember Jesus is King, ask, what does that mean for me right now? And if you don't consider yourself a Jesus follower, maybe try it as a mental exercise. What could it mean if that were true? If Jesus really is King, what could that mean for you in your life? And when the kids are being nuts, or you're stuck in traffic, or the election doesn't go the way you want, or your boss is being crazy, or your work just sucks, what does Jesus being King mean to you in that moment? What feelings, actions, thoughts were created by those words, by what those words mean? Because think about it. If Jesus is King, what is there to worry about? If Jesus is already King, what is there to fight and argue about? If Jesus is King, then we have a role in his kingdom. If Jesus is King, no matter what happens, everything will be okay one day, and true justice will be done. And even our worst enemy, death, has already been defeated and will ultimately be destroyed forever. And we are free to love and follow our King calmly and confidently, seeing reality clearly and understanding our role in bringing Jesus' love to every situation. Following Jesus prepares us to calmly and confidently face anything. Thanks for watching and listening, especially if this is your first time. If you liked what you saw and heard, click like and subscribe so you don't miss another episode. We are a church in Salem, Oregon, and you can find out more about who we are and what we do at yourcrosscreek.com. And we love questions and conversations, so reach out to us at info@yourcrosscreek.com. And we are a nonprofit. We don't really exist without support from people just like you. So if you want to keep this good thing going, you can donate at yourcrosscreek.com/donate. And until we see you again, keep loving and stay classy, Salem.